Alright, what's going on, guys? The world of Elden Ring is one set in a high fantasy, somewhat bleak landscape that feels both alive and dead at the same time, as if its prime is somewhere long in the past, but it still bears a sort of whimsical charm. And one thing that helps cement that theme and feeling are the weapons that the characters use. There is a very wide arsenal available to the players, such as a giant finger, a jellyfish, a flail of planets, and many more that are equally weird. But today I want to imagine new ones and list my top 5 new weapons that I want to see come in Elden Ring DLC, because even though the game already has a whopping 308, there's definitely space for more under the shadow of the Erdtree. But as we get into the list today, let me give a big shout out to the sponsor of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by Enlisted. Enlisted is a free-to-play squad-based first-person shooter that skillfully combines PvE and PvP combat. Play out the decisive battles of World War II by leading your squad against other squads and fighting alongside the United States, Japan, the Soviet Union, and Germany with hundreds of weapons and vehicles to employ. And if you're someone that's already part of the game, Enlisted has recently received a huge metagame update, adding research trees for weapons and vehicles, matchmaking based off equipment, and lots of other gameplay improvements. So there's never been a better time to experience the new era of Enlisted. So jump in for free today using my link down in the description, where PC players will receive a big bonus pack, giving them 2 new weapons, a new helmet for their soldiers, 4,000 silver in 3 days of a premium account. So a big thank you to Enlisted for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back into it. Let's start off with the one that pretty much everybody suggests, that being proper trick weapons. Now Elden Ring has a good amount of weapons that change their form whenever using the weapon art, but they don't stay in that form. Compare this to Bloodborne, where every weapon was essentially 2 in 1, and you have a style that's been sorely missed in the modern Souls games. Trick weapons created a complexity of combos that allowed weapons to function in different ways that typically made up for the primary weapon's shortcomings, such as a great sword transforming into a short sword that allowed for quick swings, or a twin blade that transformed into dual daggers. Now while there are incredibly unique Ashes of War that have very bombastic and powerful abilities, trick weapons thrived on the fundamentals, and there is definitely a gap and need for those in Elden Ring. It wouldn't be hard to add them to the game at all. They would fit right into the systems already in place. Just simply switch out the Ash of War for the ability to change the weapon's function. Implementing the combos that were possible in Bloodborne with the stance changes mid-roll or mid-combo may prove to be a bit of an issue, but I do think they would fit right in. I know there's a huge demand for trick weapons on the multiplayer side of things, because they add that level of complexity that throws people off, where a weapon doesn't only have one moveset, and allows the player to tackle those different scenarios differently every time. And honestly, at this point, we need just about anything that can shake up the PvP side of things at all. And since we're probably never going back to Yharnam, it would be nice if FromSoftware could bring a little bit of it back to us in DLC. This next one's going to be pretty controversial, but I think out of everything we talk about on the list today, this one has the biggest chance of actually happening. I'm really hoping we get several more sleep weapons in the Elden Ring DLC. Sleep as a status effect is incredibly powerful in PvE, and one of the best ways to deal with non-remembrance bosses in the game, as it'll incapacitate the enemy for a while, typically leaving them open for a critical attack, or just generally docile for a long period of time. The issue here is that there are only 2 weapons in the entire game that do inherent sleep damage, one being Saint Trina's Torch, which isn't accessible until the consecrated snowfields, and although can serve as a good offhand tool, is virtually useless as a standalone weapon. And the other is the Sword of Saint Trina, which is pretty good at inflicting the sleep status, but also, like the Torch, is fairly weak in comparison to other weapons, and there are much better options. Now of course, with a status effect this powerful, you'd want it to be balanced, and for the most part it is, as items that inflict sleep status are pretty hard to come by, and the materials used to craft them are rare as well, which is why I think we desperately need more weapons that do sleep damage. And I think that if they were to add them, there'd be plenty of ways to balance it. Now that Elden Ring has separate PvE and PvP scaling, weapons that are actually viable as themselves, that build up sleep status, could be toned down quite a bit in PvP as to not be overpowered, and the ones in PvE could receive scaling options that force the player to actually spec into the build in order for the sleep to proc at a reasonable pace. I think a good way to go about it is by making a greatsword. Sleep would work great on a greatsword, since the weapon is slow hitting and would require dedication in order to get enough hits in to proc the status, but when you do, you're rewarded with big damage and a free fully charged R2. But with Miquella likely being a prominent figure in the DLC and Saint Trina being a big part of that story, give me the greatsword of Saint Trina. I think that would be a perfect remembrance weapon. No video talking about weapon suggestions for Elden Ring would be complete without talking about flails. And it's no secret, the flails in Elden Ring are just simply bad, due to a number of factors such as lackluster damage, incredibly short range, and an overall cumbersome moveset. You're pretty much better off using any other weapon in the game than a flail. And so it begs the question, can anything be done to save the flails? And honestly, I do think the answer is yes. Take for example the whips, a weapon that in past Souls games was mediocre at best, received a full overhaul in Elden Ring, and now can pack a serious punch, both in PvE and PvP. The flails need that same love, but it's going to take more than simply increasing the damage or speed at which they move. I think we need a new type of flail altogether that can be power stance along with the flails we currently have. The gladiators are honestly the perfect example of what a good flail can look like. The moveset is wide, it packs a punch, and flows with momentum, exactly how a flail is supposed to be used. Now yes, technically their weapon is two hammers chained together, but what's stopping FromSoftware from putting a great hammer on the end of a chain and calling it a grand flail? Nothing. We already have more ridiculous weapons in the game. So I say bring on the grand flails, and let me combo it with a flail we already have. Coming in at number 2 is a weapon that technically already exists in the game and we've talked about before here on the channel, and that is the Crystallian Ring blade. Elden Ring does a great job at letting you get the arsenal that you see enemies wielding, even when it comes to boss weapons, to the point where there's only a handful or less of weapons you can find in the game that you can't actually get. And if the player could get one of these, it would introduce an entire new weapon type. These ring blades don't behave like any other weapon in the game. They're primarily thrown along the ground like a wheel and returned back to the thrower, also used in a sort of spin move and swung around normally like an axe. This would be a fantastic weapon to let the players have because it would provide a good heavy hitting medium range option. I could see the attack where you roll it being the weapon art, dealing a hefty amount of poise damage. And if they wanted to throw in the little rings that are throwables that the Crystallians use as well as the left hand option when two-handing it, that would add even more flavor to this weapon. Overall, I think the Crystallian Ring blade is one of the most unique weapons in the game, and it is a shame that we can't get it. So hopefully it makes its rightful appearance in the DLC. Coming in at the number 1 spot is a weapon that needs no introduction. This is the one and only Bone Fist. Now if you're around in the glory days of Dark Souls 2, drop kicking all the enemies off the map and tearing your way through Drangleic with ninja moves, then this is a weapon whose absence has left a hole in your heart since Dark Souls 2 went out of style. But in case you're unfamiliar with the Bone Fist, let me give you a bit of a refresher. The Bone Fist was of course a fist weapon added in the Dark Souls 2 DLC, but instead of having a basic club-like moveset, it transformed you into a world-class kung fu master. It was super easy to catch enemies off guard with this, especially in PvP, because there was nothing else quite like it. But above all of it was the sprinting R1 that transformed your running attack into a flying dropkick. Now there was nothing more satisfying than landing one of these in a fight club on the Iron Keep Bridge, and it made for a ton of fantastic memories with this game. Now even though the Bone Fist was more of a gimmick weapon, it was actually pretty good. And for all the faults that Dark Souls 2 had, creativity was not one of them, and the Bone Fist is a perfect piece of evidence for that. Now I would never go so far as to say Elden Ring lacks creativity in this department, but I do struggle to think of a weapon that's as fun and iconic as the Bone Fist. But let's think about it for a second. If the Bone Fist were to come into Elden Ring, there's so much they could do with it. Even if it retained its original moveset, there's a whole new dimension with jumping. Heck, they could even just turn us into Hoaraloo and let us powerbomb people in the Colosseum. The possibilities here are endless. So for me, the Bone Fist or a weapon like it takes the number 1 spot as what I'd like to see added in the DLC, and I think for pretty obvious reasons. But those are the top 5 weapons I'd like to see return or show up in Elden Ring DLC, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Whether it be a weapon from a past Souls game or one entirely made up, let me know down in the comments section below. Anyways though guys, that is going to do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.